Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be discussing one of the most famous and beloved plays of all time, Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. This tragic tale of young love has captured the hearts of audiences for centuries, and I can't wait to dive into it with you. Act 1 of Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare sets the stage for the tragic love story of the two young protagonists. The act begins with a prologue that gives the audience a brief summary of the plot and hints at the tragic ending. In Scene 1, the Capulet servants, led by Samson and Gregory, are walking through the streets of Verona when they encounter the Montague servants. A brawl breaks out, and soon the heads of both households, Lord Capulet and Lord Montague, arrive on the scene. The Prince of Verona intervenes and threatens both families with death if they continue their feud. In Scene 2, we are introduced to Romeo, a Montague, who is heartbroken over his unrequited love for a woman named Rosaline. His friend Benvolio encourages him to forget about her and attend the Capulets' masquerade ball that evening, where he might find a new love. Meanwhile, Lord Capulet is discussing the possibility of marrying his daughter, Juliet, to Count Paris, a wealthy nobleman. In Scene 3, Lady Capulet and Juliet's nurse discuss the possibility of Juliet marrying Paris. Juliet is hesitant but agrees to consider it. In Scene 4, Romeo, Benvolio, and their friend Mercutio arrive at the Capulets' ball, where Romeo sees Juliet for the first time and is immediately smitten. In Scene 5, Romeo and Juliet have their first conversation, and they fall deeply in love. However, their happiness is short-lived when Juliet learns that Romeo is a Montague, and Romeo discovers that Juliet is a Capulet. Act 1 of Romeo and Juliet sets the stage for the tragic love story that will unfold in the following acts. The feud between the Capulet and Montague families creates an obstacle to Romeo and Juliet's love, and their families' disapproval will lead to their tragic end. Act 2 of Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare begins with Romeo sneaking away from his friends to find Juliet in the Capulets' orchard. He overhears her confessing her love for him from her balcony and reveals himself to her. They exchange vows of love and plan to marry the following day with the help of Friar Lawrence. In Scene 2, the comic relief character, the nurse, arrives to deliver a message from Juliet to Romeo about the details of their planned wedding. She also tells him about the difficulties Juliet is facing with her family and advises him to be cautious. In Scene 3, Romeo goes to Friar Lawrence's cell to ask him to marry him and Juliet. The friar is initially skeptical, but he sees the potential for their union to bring an end to the feud between the Capulet and Montague families and agrees to marry them. In Scene 4, Mercutio and Benvolio search for Romeo and discuss Tybalt, Juliet's hot-headed cousin, who is looking for Romeo. Romeo meets with them briefly and tells them he plans to marry Juliet, but they do not understand. In Scene 5, the nurse arrives to meet with Romeo and delivers a message from Juliet, telling him where and when to meet her for their wedding. She also warns him that Tybalt knows he is at the Capulets' party and is looking for him. Act 2 of Romeo and Juliet advances the love story between Romeo and Juliet, and the tension builds as they plan to marry in secret. The characters of the nurse and Friar Lawrence play significant roles in the plot's development, and the impending conflict with Tybalt adds to the sense of danger and foreboding that will culminate in tragedy. Act 3 of Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare is the pivotal point in the play where the tragic events that will ultimately lead to the death of the two young lovers begin to unfold. In Scene 1, Mercutio and Benvolio are walking through the streets of Verona when they are confronted by Tybalt, who is seeking revenge against Romeo. A fight breaks out, and when Romeo arrives, he attempts to stop the fight, but Tybalt stabs Mercutio. Mercutio dies, and in his anger and grief, Romeo kills Tybalt. In Scene 2, the nurse tells Juliet what has happened, and she is devastated by the news of Tybalt's death and Romeo's banishment. She expresses her conflicting feelings of love for Romeo and loyalty to her family, but ultimately decides to stand by her husband. In Scene 3, Romeo seeks refuge in Friar Lawrence's cell, where the friar advises him to flee to Mantua until he can sort out the situation. Romeo is distraught at the thought of being separated from Juliet and considers suicide, but the friar convinces him to be patient and wait for news of their reconciliation. In Scene 4, Lord Capulet decides to hasten Juliet's marriage to Count Paris, unaware that she is already married to Romeo. Juliet pleads with her father to delay the wedding, but he becomes enraged and threatens to disown her if she refuses. In Scene 5, Romeo and Juliet share their final night together before Romeo must leave for Mantua. As dawn approaches, Juliet begs Romeo to stay, but he must leave. They say their final goodbyes, not knowing that they will never see each other again. Act 3 of Romeo and Juliet marks the turning point in the play, where the love story takes a tragic turn. The death of Tybalt sets off a chain of events that will lead to the ultimate demise of Romeo and Juliet, as their families feud, and their own impulsive actions lead to their downfall. The themes of love, loyalty, and tragedy are heightened in this act as the plot thickens and the characters' emotions are tested to their limits. Act 4 of Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare is a tragic and suspenseful act that sets the stage for the play's tragic conclusion. In Scene 1, Friar Lawrence and Paris meet in the churchyard where Juliet's tomb is located. Paris tells the friar that he intends to marry Juliet, but the friar knows that she is already married to Romeo. He tries to stall Paris and sends him away, hoping to buy more time to reunite Romeo and Juliet. In Scene 2, Juliet arrives at Friar Lawrence's cell and reveals her desperation to avoid marrying Paris. The friar gives her a potion that will put her in a deep sleep for 42 hours, during which time her family will believe she is dead. He promises to send a letter to Romeo in Mantua, telling him of the plan so that he can come and take Juliet away when she wakes up. In Scene 3, Juliet returns home and tells her parents that she has agreed to marry Paris. They are overjoyed and begin to prepare for the wedding. Juliet takes the potion and falls into a deep sleep, appearing to be dead. In Scene 4, the Capulet household is in chaos as they prepare for the wedding while mourning Juliet's supposed death. The nurse discovers her and tries to wake her, but to no avail. The wedding turns into a funeral, and the family is grief-stricken. Act 4 of Romeo and Juliet sets up the play's tragic ending by showing how the misunderstandings and impulsiveness of the characters lead to a series of catastrophic events. The friar's plan to reunite Romeo and Juliet goes awry, and the lovers are doomed to die tragically. The theme of the inevitability of fate and the consequences of impulsive actions are emphasized in this act as the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet unfolds. Act 5 of Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare is the final act of the play, where the tragic events that have been building up throughout the play come to a devastating conclusion. In Scene 1, Romeo learns of Juliet's supposed death from Balthasar and rushes back to Verona, intending to die by her side. He goes to an apothecary and buys a poison, which he plans to use to end his life. In Scene 2, Friar Lawrence learns that his plan has gone awry and rushes to the Capulet tomb to try to stop Romeo. But he arrives too late, and Romeo has already taken the poison. Juliet wakes up from her sleep, and the friar tries to convince her to flee with him. But Juliet refuses to leave without Romeo and sees that he has died. She takes his dagger and stabs herself. In Scene 3, the prince and the Capulets and Montagues arrive at the tomb and discover the tragic scene. The friar explains what has happened, and the prince scolds the families for their feud, which has led to the deaths of their children. Act 5 of Romeo and Juliet brings the play's tragic events to their inevitable conclusion. The themes of love, loyalty, and the destructive power of hatred and vengeance are emphasized in this act as the play's characters suffer the consequences of their actions. The play's tragic ending serves as a reminder of the cost of unchecked hatred and the importance of love, forgiveness, and reconciliation. And that's a wrap for our summary of Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. I hope you enjoyed learning about this timeless play as much as I did. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more literary content, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.